In making your point, we come back to the research question because it is a foundational element of your research paper. Some important qualities about your working research question, and I use the word working because I realize you're going to revise it as you read more and refine your ideas. But the first thing is that it has to pass the so what test, which means it has to be of potential importance to your field. So if you're doing searches for your topic and you're not finding anything, that might be a clue that your research question is not researchable. It also needs to be concise and clear. Remember, in general, as sentence length increases, clarity decreases. So aim for about 14 words and eliminate all extra words. Your research question also needs to be narrow enough and focused enough that it's manageable for a length of paper you're writing for this class. Things to avoid. One thing is vague words. The most common words I see in students writing research papers are the words culture and society. So if you say the culture of the United States, the high school my children go to here in Anchorage has 90 language groups. It is the most racially diverse high school in the United States. You cannot say there's a culture of that high school. There are many cultures. Jargon is another thing. If you're going to write in social sciences or in systematic theology, you're going to run into lots of specialized terms. However, don't assume that everyone in this class understands those terms, and if you use a lot of them, especially in your research question, you will alienate your readers because they will not understand what you are talking about. Research question revision is a natural process, so don't be afraid to do it. I often will be revising my research question all the way down until the day my research paper is due, so there's nothing wrong with it. It's a natural thing. Okay, let's talk about primary sources. Think original sources. So a primary source for theology and theological studies would be the Bible or other sacred works. Also original manuscripts, letters, or laws. In the social or physical sciences, a primary source would be normally original research presented in peer-reviewed journals or presented in conferences. Secondary sources, here think interpretations, analysis, and evaluation of original sources. So here we have textbooks, commentaries on Bible books, or theology research articles that have been published in peer-reviewed journals or presented in conferences. Tertiary sources, here think distilled information from primary and secondary sources. So this will be things like specialized dictionaries, specialized encyclopedias, and handbooks. Now I say I'm leaving out general dictionaries on purpose, because if you are doing research in maybe pastor burnout, or the challenges of ministry, or a Christology maybe, you'd be a lot better off to go to a specialized dictionary in systematic theology or counseling, because you'll get a lot more specialized technical definition than you would from a general dictionary. I have nothing against general dictionaries, but for a research paper, it'll always be more highly regarded if you go to a specialized dictionary. The same thing for encyclopedias. Nothing wrong with World Book or Encyclopedia Britannica, or, well, I won't even talk about Wikipedia right now. We've discussed that earlier, but go to an encyclopedia of systematic theology or a specialized encyclopedia that has to do with counseling or group dynamics or whatever it is you're talking about. There's specialized encyclopedias for all kinds of things. Handbooks are another example of a tertiary source. So handbooks on the Bible would be tertiary, and again, these are all distilled information from primary and secondary sources. So if you're going to do research in a social science topic, at least 50% of your sources need to come from the sources you cite in your paper, and in this class, the lower limit of sources you cite are 16. So at least 50%, or 8 of them, must be from probably peer-reviewed journals, because that's where you're going to find the primary sources for social science, or conference proceedings. The remaining 50% can be from secondary and tertiary sources. For theology topics, at least 80% have to be from primary and secondary sources. If you're writing a paper about a theology topic, it had better cite the Bible. That's a primary source. And then secondary sources are also important. Things like Bible commentaries. I want you to look at those for sure. But for this class, I want you to learn how to access peer-reviewed journals to see what people are saying about a topic right now. And so citing journals is a must in this. I'd like to see a lot of peer-reviewed journal articles cited, just so you can affirm for me that you know how to find them, and because they're a great source of current information. The remaining 20% can be from tertiary sources. Peer review is really important. In academic journals, they go through a very specific peer review process, but there are other things. For instance, sometimes papers presented at conferences go through a peer review process that is very similar to a journal article, but it's important for other experts to check the thinking of their peers before something goes into publication, because even people who are very bright make mistakes. Web resources can also be problematic. Let me restate this. We've talked about this before, but our reference librarians have put together a very nice set of sources for you to look at in our Wayland online library. Stay within the bounds they have drawn. A few years ago, I had a student in a New Testament history class who was in a hurry to present, turn in a paper, and he turned this into me, and I started reading it, and what had happened is he waited until the last minute to complete the assignment, and he copied and pasted a satanic commentary of the book of Timothy and turned that in as his own work. I have to admit, I called him in and had a little fun with him, asked him if he was a Satanist. He had no idea what I was talking about. So be careful. When you take notes, a good place to begin are in those tertiary sources. Dictionaries or subject encyclopedias can be a great way to get an overview of a topic. If they're published recently, sometimes they will have good primary and secondary source citations you can go to. Textbooks are also a great place to get an overview of a topic. As you take notes, of course you want to start with an overview kind of source, but remember, as you work, do summaries and paraphrases of your sources. Don't wait until the end of the term, and it's such a temptation to do this now with all the online sources, to simply copy and paste, so that at the end of the term, all you have are exact words, and you have to try to get all the original words of the authors untangled so it's your own words and you've created a monster. So do the work as you go along so you don't leave it all for the last minute. Statistics are also important, especially if you picked a social science topic. But if you do that, be careful with statistics, because you will alienate or bury your readers very quickly if you devote a whole section to numbers. View them as supplementary evidence as you present your topic. This is a short term. It's only 11 weeks. And I know that because of that, there may be some really juicy quote you want to use for your paper, and you cannot find the original source that it came from. That's fine. There's a way to do that in Turabian, and we'll talk about that in class this week. I've heard ugly rumors that have circulated through the years that the only time it's appropriate to cite a source is when you use a direct quote. That is not true. I repeat, it is not true. Part of your obligation as a researcher is to share what you found with others. So anytime you take a thought from a source, summarize a source, paraphrase a source, use a statistic from a source, quote a source, always cite it. So when you're in doubt, cite something. Sometimes students will say, well, isn't this general information? This is common knowledge. I don't need to put a citation. Find something that says that. That's part of doing a research paper. And guess what? If you find something that is an authoritative source for something that is common knowledge, you get to add a source to your reference page. The obligation of the researcher is always to go to the original source if you can get to it. So if you're in theology, that means you need to be reading the Bible passages for yourself and doing your own thinking. If it is social science research and someone talks about a study someone did, let's say you're reading a newspaper, maybe the Dallas Morning News, and you see that someone did a study, the Centers for Disease Control, maybe they published a study about mortality rates among ministers. Then rather than quote the Dallas Morning News, your obligation as a researcher is to go to that Centers for Disease Control report. The journalist got to it. You can too. Don't depend on someone to interpret something for you that you can get to for yourself. So always go to the original source. Let's talk about appeals to authority. The references you cite for your paper, at least 16 of them, are a foundational element for your paper. Your paper is only as good as the information on which it is based. So if you're basing your paper on Rolling Stone magazine and Star magazine and other kinds of tabloids, you're in real trouble. You need to, and this is one of the places where you can really benefit from what the librarians at Wayland have done in setting up some good boundaries, some good parameters. Stay within those and you'll be a lot better off. Another issue in appealing to authority is you have to think about criteria for genuine authority. One is the person has to have competence in the area in which they're making a judgment. In other words, it's within the field that they study. One difficult case is Linus Pauling, who may be the greatest American scientist in history. He got 2 Nobel Prizes awarded to him alone. Amazing man. Worked with quantum chemistry. However, during his career, he started to publish stuff and talk about megadosing on vitamins and how this would help even cure cancer. The problem is Linus Pauling's field of expertise was quantum chemistry, not vitamin therapy or oncology. And so he went from being called the greatest scientist that the United States has ever produced to being called the greatest quack, because he was making pronouncements and statements outside his field of authority. So just because somebody's a Nobel Prize winner even doesn't mean that everything they say in every field is true. This is also true for movie stars who make statements, before the Congress, and their only credential is that they're famous. So glamour does not give someone genuine authority. Let's talk about the Turabian Manual. The Turabian Manual is Chicago style for students and researchers. Now, we could require you to buy the full Chicago Manual of Style, but it's 1,000 pages long and it costs about $68. So I think it's a lot more humane to use Turabian, which is a guide to using the Chicago Manual of Style. But you need to know that Turabian is a guide to using the Chicago Manual of Style. And if you're really ambitious, you can go buy it. Part 1 of the Turabian Guide is Research and Writing from Planning to Production. This section is the best research methods textbook out there. I have not seen its equal anywhere. And we're on the honor system this term, and now I realize that might be a mistake. In future terms, I'm going to have quizzes for each chapter of Turabian, because from the questions I've gotten from some of you, I can tell that you're not reading this. So please read it. I'm not going to go back and require quizzes now since we're into the term, because I don't think that would be fair, but you do need to read it. It's a wonderful, wonderful text. Part 2 has to do with source citation. That is, how do you cite maybe a multi-part commentary on the Gospel of John, and many other things. Part 3 is style. This has to do with spelling, grammar, that kind of thing. The last section, the appendix, is general paper formatting and submission. Turabian covers 2 kinds of citation types, so don't get confused. There's the notes bibliography style and the author date style. The School of Religion and Philosophy has declared that students will use the notes bibliography style with footnotes. See Rule 15.3.1 of Turabian. Chapter 16 gives the basic form of the notes bibliography style, and Chapter 17 gives lots and lots of examples of citing specific types of sources in the notes bibliography style. One important thing for you in this class is that you need to know how to cite the Bible properly. The rules in Turabian that have to do with citing the Bible are listed here: 16.2.3, 16.4.3.1, 17.5.2, 24.6, 22.3.2.3. So please read all of those before the session this week. In the appendix, it has to do with formatting. The introduction to the appendix says, and I've added a word here, that's the reason the square brackets are there for the sake of clarity. Requirements for a class paper are set by your instructor. Now, the Wayland Style Guide in the School of Religion and Philosophy is in flux right now, and I'm actually the person revising it. And so look at section A1, General Formatting Requirements, before our class this week, and we will discuss how I hope to simplify the style guide, at least for term papers, so that your cover sheet, your title page is more simple and there is no table of contents. Now, if you're writing a thesis or a dissertation, you would need a table of contents, but for a paper of this length, you don't.